Welcome to the Education Connection Day for the 30th Annual Midland Storytelling Festival. This program provides content for secondary level, grades 7 through 12. Our tellers today are Charlotte Blake Alston of Lansdowne, Pennsylvania, and Bill Lepp of Charleston, West Virginia. As you listen today, notice the difference in their artistic styles, how they communicate and tell a story. Then, as you think about your own communication skills, realize that if you can think it and speak it, you can write it. Let's listen.
Greetings. I thought I'd offer you a little what I call rap rhythm and rhyme. So for centuries, human beings have actually crafted stories in poetic form, in rhythm, and in rhyme and in verse. If you look at a lot of Western literature, which is what we study here in the United States, you'll find, if you go back far enough, you find written epics that are done in a poetic form or in rhythm and in rhyme. But everywhere in the world, if you go to West Africa, where the oral historians would recount their stories with song and rhythm and rhyme as well, in Ireland, but just about every place in the world, you'll find that history along the timeline of human development and human communication. So I'm going to start with, see if I can sneak two pieces in the time that we have. I'm going to start with a piece that I wrote about an American folk hero, an African-American folk hero who goes by the name of John Henry. Don't know if you've heard of him before. I'm going to give you a little information, and then I'm going to trust that you're going to do a little Googling around to find out a little bit more. So in the early days of America, the infrastructure, what we call the infrastructure of the country, was for the most part, built by men, by manual labor. So infrastructure, we're talking about, creating roads, paved roads, to take your horse and carriage on, or your Model T Ford. We're talking about bridges to go across bodies of water to connect one community to another, and also laying railroad track across the country from the East Coast to the West Coast. All that was done with manual labor. In the case of the laying of railroad track, they had to lay railroad track through all kinds of terrain, so prairies, through deserts, through forests, and also through mountains. And the way they would get themselves through the mountains was they had men with long steel spikes that they would hold up against the side of the rock. They had men like John Henry who would wield 10, 15, 20-pound steel hammers. They would swing those hammers, hit them up against that steel spike, and they would hammer until that spike had made a deep enough indentation in the rock that men could come along, put sticks of dynamite in, blast that part of the rock, that part of the mountain, cart all of that away, and they'd start the process all over again until they had literally hammered their way all the way through the rock to the other side. So along comes a man who invents a steam drill and says, hey, the steam drill can do the work of all the men here who are doing this manual labor. The story goes, the legend goes, that John Henry stepped up, realizing that if the steam drill were put to use, it would put men out of work. And he said to the foreman, I'm going to prove to you that a man is worth more than a machine. And he proceeded to literally race the machine to see who could get through the rock first. So there are sung ballads about John Henry. This is my spoken ballad. And again, I trust you're going to do a little bit of research on your own. Again, once in rhythm and rhyme. Hammers of steel rang out. Huh! Hammers of steel rang out. Huh! Hammers of steel rang out. Huh! Hammers of steel rang out. He was born in Missouri in the 1840s. Others say that Alabama was the place. Some say he wasn't nothing but a Louisiana man, or the one North Carolinians embrace. Legend says that he was born with a hammer in his hand. That's the way the story goes. I can't imagine how his mama endured that pain, so I'll spare you the birthing woes. They say the frog stopped frogging and the cricket stopped cricking and the mighty winds quieted down. All of nature was a-watching and a-waiting and a-listening for that itty-bitty baby sound. And as soon as baby John drew his first breath, the mighty rivers roared. Baby John jumped down, started crawling around, banging his hammer on the cabin floor. Yes, he did. Hammers of steel rang out. Huh! Hammers of steel rang out. You can join me. Hammers of steel rang out. Hammers of steel rang out. Well, Lord have mercy, his mama cried. Now, I'm not one to complain, but I want you to know that it feels like I just gave birth to a full-grown man. Well, he wasn't quite a man, but he certainly grew to be a big, tall, strapping boy. And plowing, planting, hauling, lifting was the kind of work he enjoyed. Legend says that one day, as an itty-bitty boy, when he was sitting on his daddy's knee, he pointed his finger at a great piece of steel and said, "That steel's gonna be the death of me." Well, he soon grew bored with farm-type work. He had an itching to travel the land. So he went to find work that would make better use of the strength that he had in his hands. And yes, he did. Hammers of steel rang out. 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 Well, he got a job working on a river boat, and that suited his fancy just fine. And soon his story was being told all up and down the riverboat line. For one dark night, one stormy night, the riverboat paddle wheel broke. "We're taking on water," the captain cried. "We got to bail to stay afloat." Well, young John Henry jumped on the deck, eased across a wooden plank, and before you could say "Great God from Zion," he jumped down onto the paddle wheel crank. Well, he pushed, pulled, moaned and groaned, and the paddle wheel started to turn. John Henry pushed that riverboat back into port by the crack of dawn, and yes, he did. Hammers of steel rang out. 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 Well, after spending some time on a riverboat, he was yearning for a bigger test. He heard men talking about railroad tracks being laid from the east to the west. They're laying track across prairies, rivers, plains, gonna blast through the mountains' core. John Henry got excited, thought to himself, "This is the challenge I've been waiting for." They needed men of strength to wield 10-pound hammers to drive those steel spikes through, so the powdermen could put in the dynamite, blast it, and cart away the residue. Well, they reached the mountain, and that was the place where Big John's true test began. But all he was thinking was, "It feels so good to have a hammer in my hands again." And yes, he did. Hammers of steel rang out. 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 Oh, well, the men start singing and the hammers start swinging, and they swung those hammers all day. Each crew worked hard and fast as they could, but John's steel gang led the way. Nobody had ever seen such a man like John. He did the job of 10 strong men. And from the owner to the foreman to the water boy, everybody was in awe of him. But one day, a man showed up, told the boss, "I can save you time. This brand new steam drill could do the work of all the hammers on the steel gang line." Well, John spoke up. "I don't know about that. These are good, hard-working men. They've laid track for you all across this land, and they'll be loyal until the end. No matter how hard-working they might be, there's no man who could beat a machine. And I dare anybody to challenge the thought that he could beat a drill powered by steam." See, this here man didn't know John Henry, hadn't heard about the paddle boat wheel, and there was nobody better than Big John Henry at swinging those hammers of steel. So John said, "I'll take the test, for all these men have worked hard all across this land. Because before I let my steel gang down, I'll die with a hammer in my hand." Yes, he did. Hammers of steel rang out. 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 Well, the stage was set. The Big Bend Tunnel was the site of the big showdown. One look in John's eye, and you knew he was not gonna let his steel gang down. "Come on, Lil Bill, grab them steel spikes. You and me's got work to do." Bill shook John's hand and said, "There's nobody that I'd rather do this with than you." It was on John's back that the jobs of all these hard-working men would ride. So he calmed himself and prepared to hammer into the belly of the mountainside. Lil Bill grabbed one of the handheld spikes and placed it against the rock. John Henry picked up a 10-pound maul and prepared to race the clock. The men stepped back to watch. There was so much tension in the air. You could cut that thickness with a knife and still have more than your share. Well, they got into position, side by side, the steam drill and the man. Bill heaved a sigh, tightened his grip, steadied the steel spike with his hands. The foreman called out number one. The operator's hand started to twitch. The foreman called out number two. The nervous hand went towards the switch. The foreman dropped his hands on three, and the steam drill roared to life. But the very first hit they heard was steel on steel. John Henry had made the first strike. Ah! Hammers of steel rang out. Hoo! 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 Hiss! Hiss! Pop, 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 pop. The steam drill chugged and churned, and shovel after shovel after shovel of coal, that steam drill quickly burned. And John Henry was slamming that spike so hard and fast that it got red hot. Lil Bill had to drop it, picked up another. John Henry kept up the fight. Give me a 20-pound hammer, give it to me quick. He tossed the 10-pound hammer away, and the sound of steel on steel echoed all through the mountains and the canyons that day. But swinging one hammer wasn't good enough. Give me a second, when the big man cried. He was swinging both hammers so fast that you could barely see it with the naked eye. They poured water on the steam drill to keep it cool as man and machine kept pace, drilling deeper and deeper until the stone cold rock. It wasn't clear who was winning the race. But John kept going, swinging both hammers till everybody could see that where Big John Henry had dug 5 feet, the machine had only dug 3. 6 foot, 8 foot, 10 foot, John was out drilling the drilling machine. When the steam drill reached the 8-foot mark, John Henry had reached 13. Pour water, shovel in more coal. We can't stop drilling now. But the machine couldn't keep up with Big John's pace, seemed to be slowing down. Then all of a sudden, the steam drill started shaking, shuddered, and it came to a halt. The machine overheated, stopped dead cold, seemed to be falling apart. Yeah, woohoo! All the men cried. He did it. He beat that thing. The 2 holes he drilled total 14 feet. The machine couldn't manage 10. Well, John stopped swinging, and all of a sudden, a beam of light shone in his eyes. He had hammered his way through the last bit of rock and broken through to the other side. But when John stepped out into the light, drew in a slow, deep breath, his body gave out. He collapsed to the ground, just the way he predicted his death. Well, both man and machine were silent. The hammers no longer rang, but the rhythm of the strikes could be felt in the hearts of every member of John's steel gang. Well, they carried him off the mountain and buried him in the sand. And people came from the east and the west to visit the grave of this man. And if you make your way to the Big Bend Tunnel, there's a statue on that spot. It's in West Virginia. It's been vandalized, pulled off its stand, peppered with buckshot. But no buckshot will stop the stories and songs from being told throughout this land of Big John Henry, the steel-driving man who died with a hammer in his hands. Whoo! Hammers of steel rang out. 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 John Henry, leader of the steel driving gang. So I'm going to leave you with a rap, actually. And the first time I did a rap, I was still teaching, and I did a rap about what was going on in our elementary school, and I heard a 4th grader. I had her in kindergarten. She said, "Look at Miss Alston trying to bust a rhyme." I'm like, trying to bust a rhyme? I'm not a bust a rhyme. So my son was 12 and a half years old when rapping first came on the scene here in the United States, and we thought it was going to go away, and it didn't. My son is 46 years old, and we still have rapping. And people use rap to talk about their experiences. You can use that form. It's been around for a very long time. It really just wasn't created here in the United States back in the 1980s or so. So I'd like to leave you with the very first rap that I ever wrote. And when I was young, The people in the generation above us, we would call their music old school, So this is not even an old school rap. This is like ancient school. Okay. So I wrote it in honor of the work, the life of Martin Luther King. So come and listen to, oops, that's a different rap. Let's all sing for Dr. King, because we've all got to help make freedom ring. Let's all sing for Dr. King, because we've all got to help make freedom ring. While Martin Luther King was a man of peace, he wanted all the hatred in the world to cease. There were some laws that were not fair, and people were suffering everywhere. Rosa Parks caused such a fuss when she would not stand on the bus. Dr. King stood by her side, and the people said, well, we won't ride. They all knew that they were right, so they all got together and decided to fight. They fought for justice and equality right here in America, the land of the free. They would not use any guns for this, but they would peacefully resist. King knew love could conquer hate, and truth did not discriminate. Finally, the bus company, they had to change their policy. Anyone who paid the fare, they had the right to sit down anywhere. So let's all sing for Dr. King, because we've all got to help make freedom ring. Let's all sing for Dr. King, because we've all got to help make freedom ring. Well, pretty soon folks of different races began to protest in many places. They tried to change laws that were bad. They used all the courage that they had. Many of them were thrown in jail, but they didn't give up and they didn't fail. Thousands of people lent a hand. Thousands marched throughout the land. They finally marched to Washington to show the world what they had done. Cameras filmed the situation and people watched throughout the nation. They all listened to Dr. King when he said, we must let freedom ring from the mountaintop to the valley low. We must say no to old Jim Crow. Together, the people did demand that the government should take a stand to make sure laws are colorblind, because freedom, hey, it's for all mankind. So let's all sing for Dr. King, because we've all got to help make freedom ring. Let's all sing for Dr. King, because we've all got to help make freedom ring. Now we live in a country that's full of laws to protect human rights, and that's important because, unfortunately, there are people who believe they must do all they can, so we still cannot achieve. But we can't stop. Just like Dr. King, we've got songs for the world that we must sing. We can't be silent or run with dread when racism rears its ugly head. So keep your mind on peace, freedom, and love. Continue building a nation to be proud of. A lot has been accomplished, but there's still more to do. And I'm sending out a question to each of you. I'd like you to think of what you're doing today to keep Dr. King's dream from fading away. So speak out when you see things that aren't right. Use truth and courage. Continue the fight until everyone in this beautiful land can all walk together hand in hand as sisters and brothers in equality. Then America will always be the land of the free. So let's all sing for Dr. King, because we've all got to help make freedom ring. Let's all sing for Dr. King, because we've all got to help make freedom ring. Come on and let's sing for Dr. King, because we've all got to help make freedom ring. Let's all sing for Dr. King, because we've all got to help make freedom ring. Peace out.
Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, Angola, Antigua and Barbuda, Aruba, Austria, Australia, Azerbaijan. Thank you very much. When I was in the 5th grade, in our gymnasium, hanging all around the perimeter of the gym, there were flags from different countries from all over the world. And the flags were hung in alphabetical order. And our 5th grade teacher, Mr. Woodcraft, decided that each student needed to learn an alphabetical list of the countries. Now, we didn't each have to learn all of the countries. We just got one chunk of countries. And then we had to pick one of those countries and write a report on the culture and history of that country. And this was all going to culminate. We were going to go in the gym on a Friday night. Our adults were going to be there. We were going to eat food. And then each student was going to stand up and recite their list of countries. And as they recited their list of countries, they would point at the corresponding flag, and then they would read their report. So the first kid would be like, Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, Angola, Antigua and Barbuda, Aruba, Austria, Australia, Azerbaijan. I did my report on the country of Australia. Australia is a country. It is a continent. It is an island. People live there. Because that, of course, is what 5th graders sound like when they do public speaking. And then each child's adult would think to themselves, oh, our child is the smartest, brightest, most creative child in the whole school system. And all of those adults would be wrong, except mine. So, every day in class we had to stand up to practice and recite our list of countries. We were in there one day, and the girl got up to do the last several letters of the alphabet, and she said Venezuela, Vietnam, Virgin Islands, Wake Islands, West Germany, Yemen, Yugoslavia, Zambia, Zimbabwe. And when she got all done, my buddy Wally raised his hand, and he said, excuse me, Mr. Woodcraft, what about Wallace and Futuna? And Mr. Woodcraft said, well, what about Wallace and Futuna? And Wally said, Wallace and Futuna is a country. And Mr. Woodcraft said, I don't think Wallace and Futuna is a country. And Wally said, Wallace and Futuna is a country. It's an island country located in the South Pacific between Fiji and Samoa. He said, I know it's a country because my parents were in the Peace Corps, and they met on Wallace and Futuna, they fell in love, they got married, and they had me. And I am named for the country of Wallace and Futuna. Wally said, my name is Wallace Futuna Fenstermacher. And Mr. Woodcraft said, that be as it may, I don't think it's a country. And Wally said, it is a country, I know it's a country, and I demand that you formally recognize Wallace and Futuna as a country. And Mr. Woodcraft said, we don't have a flag in our gymnasium for Wallace and Futuna, therefore I refuse to formally recognize Wallace and Futuna as a country. And this, unfortunately, pretty much sums up American diplomatic policy. If your flag does not hang in the gymnasium of a rural American school, you don't exist, and that's all there is to it. So, Wally had said, I demand you formally recognize. Mr. Woodcraft had said, we don't have a flag, I refuse to formally recognize. Of course, this was back in the 1980s when we had the superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, and a tiny little country like Wallace and Futuna didn't stand much of a chance in a full frontal assault on a superpower, and teachers are essentially superpowers. So Wally knew that he wasn't beaten. He just had to step back and wait for the winds of political change to shift so that he could press his point at a later date. So, we went to gym. Now, our gym teacher was a woman named Ms. Grunkle, and we knew she was a woman because we had to call her Ms. Outside of that, we had nothing in particular to go on. And nothing about her said physical or education, except her outfit. She wore standard 1980s gym teacher clothing. She had a white polo that was buttoned all the way up to the bottom of her lowest chin. And then white polyester gym teacher shorts with the 3 metal buttons, tube socks pulled all the way up to her knees, prescription tennis shoes, a whistle, and a bullhorn. And she only communicated to us through the bullhorn. So if we were in the hallway, she would say things like, don't run. And if we were in the gym, she would say things like, run. It was very conflicting information. And I think that she could walk. I believe that she was ambulatory. She just chose not to. She had a little 3-wheeled electric scooter. And everywhere in the whole wide world that she went on that scooter. And if there was some place she couldn't go on that scooter, she didn't want to go to that place anyway. So we'd get in the gym, and she would get on her bullhorn, and she would say, line up on your numbers. All down the floor of the gym, there were masking tape numbers, and we would go and stand on our assigned number, and she would drive her scooter over to a metal cart on top of which sat a record player. She would go through a milk crate of albums, pull out something called like The Joys of Calisthenics, put that on the record player, drop the needle, and then we would hear a cheery voice that would say, let's do jumping jacks. Feet shoulder width apart, hands on your thighs, palms out, ready, 1, 2, 3. And Ms. Grunkle would drive back and forth in front of us on her scooter, yelling at us. Lepp, you call that a jumping jack? Fenstermacher, you're falling behind. Bart, show some enthusiasm. And when that was done, we would go and sit around the rope. Now, when I was in elementary school, maybe when some of you were in elementary school, hanging from the ceiling of every gymnasium in America, 4 stories above the ground, there was a rope. It came all the way down from the ceiling to about a foot off the floor. There was a tremendous knot tied in the rope. This was not an ordinary rope. This was the sort of rope that the United States Navy uses to tie aircraft carriers to cleats on a dock. It was about 4 inches in diameter. And as part of our physical education, we were supposed to climb all the way to the top of that rope, touch the ceiling, and then climb all the way back down. Very few students were strong enough to climb all the way to the top of that rope. Fewer still were strong enough to climb all the way back down. So what would happen is some poor kid would get up there 4 stories above the ground, touch the ceiling, and then one of 2 things would occur. They would either sort of let go of the rope, at which point they would come down the rope at about 784 miles an hour. And by the time they got to the bottom, there'd be nothing left but some ashes, some blisters, and some calluses. Or they would entirely let go of the rope, at which point they'd be like, "Ah, ah," and you'd think when they hit the ground they'd go, "Pfft." But no. Our teachers were concerned for our physical well-being, so they put a mat underneath of that rope. And that mat was at least as thick as my t-shirt. So when you hit, you only broke most of your bones, not all of your bones. So we would go and sit around that mat in what children now call crisscross applesauce on your bottoms, children. And why an entire generation of American children have applesauce on their bottoms, I don't know. But we would sit in a big circle around the mat, and then a weird game of duck, duck, goose would commence. Because Miss Grunkle would drive around us on her scooter, and she'd be like, "Lepp, climb the rope." Now, I have never been particularly athletic nor coordinated, and I could get my hands on the rope, and I could get my feet on the knot. But that's as high as I could get. And then I would step down and go and sit down, and she would say, "Bart, climb the rope." Now my buddy Skeeter could get his hands on the rope, he could get his feet on the knot, and Skeeter could climb until his feet were maybe 2 feet above the knot. And then he slid down and sat down. And then she said, "Ferndale, climb the rope." Now Ferndale, well, she was sort of a snooty, snotty, little freckle-faced, redheaded girl. The kind of girl you might find in the middle of the woods, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a clearing with a cauldron and a fire, saying things like, "Rat tails, dog's eyes, I hope all boys die." That sort of little girl. So she wasn't any stronger than the rest of us. But Fern got up, she got her hands on the rope, got her feet on the knot, and Fern started to climb. And Fern got to where her feet were maybe 8 feet off the ground. And then she just froze. I don't know if she ran out of strength, or if she got scared, or if it was a combination of both. But she was locked with her hands and feet just gripping the rope 8 feet off the ground. And Miss Grunkle, in her kind and compassionate way, was driving around, yelling, "Ferndale, climb up or climb down. Ferndale, climb up or climb down." Well, the more Miss Grunkle yelled, the more Fern got upset. And when Fern got upset, she started to cry. And when she started to cry, her nose started to run. And pretty soon her face was covered in tears and snot. And she needed to wipe her face. But her hands were way up here. And she couldn't get her face up to her hands. And she couldn't get her hands down to her face. But she needed to wipe her face. So finally she was just like, right on the rope. Well, those ropes were abrasive. They were made out of raw jute, steel wool, and barbed wire. And the rope just cut poor Fern's face, and the tears started to roll into those cuts, and now Fern was really crying. And Miss Grunkle decided that she was going to have to be more proactive in rescuing Fern. But she still wouldn't get off of her scooter, so she was trying to drive it up onto the mat. But she was right beside the mat, and the scooter was rear-wheel drive, so she didn't have enough power. She was like, "Ring, ring, ring." And then she backed up like 15 feet, got a good head of steam, came flying in, hit the far side of the mat, flew right over the mat, landed on the 3 kids on the other side, just took them out. They were gone. The janitor came in, sprinkled some of that red stuff on them, got the big mop, pushed them away. We never spoke of those children again. And then Miss Grunkle figured out that she could back up onto the mat. but she still wouldn't get off of her scooter, so she still wasn't tall enough to reach Fern. So finally, Miss Grunkle went over to the intercom and she called Mr. Woodcraft. And Mr. Woodcraft came down and he got Fern down. And Fern got to do what every child got to do in the 1980s when they were upset at school. Fern got to go to the bathroom, wash her face with cold water, get a Kleenex, come back in, sit down, and deal with it. And then Miss Grunkle said, Fenstermacher, climb the rope. Now that's Wally. You remember Mr. Wallace Fatuna Fenstermacher. Now Wally was one of these kids, you hear people say, oh, he can't sit still. Wally could barely sit. Some part of that kid's body was always going 100 miles an hour. It was usually his mouth. He might not even be talking, but his mouth would be going. And if he shut his mouth, some other part of his body had to take over. And if you grabbed that hand, this hand would start going. There was no potential energy about Wally. Wally was pure kinetic energy. Nowadays, they give you something for that. Back then, we just let kids go. And when Miss Grunkle said, Fenstermacher, climb the rope, we never even saw him get up. He went from sitting crisscross applesauce on his bottom children. He just went, and he hit the rope about 9 feet up. And we'd never seen it happen before, but Wally climbed clear to the ceiling. He touched the ceiling, and then Wally climbed all the way back down. And when his feet hit the knot at the bottom of the rope, Wally went right back up. And he was going down and up and down and up. And Miss Grunkle was saying, Fenstermacher, what are you doing, Fenstermacher? And Wally said, I'm climbing the rope, I'm climbing the rope. And Miss Grunkle said, Fenstermacher, quit climbing the rope. Well, Wally was an obedient child. Just because you can't quit moving doesn't mean you're not an obedient child. And when Miss Grunkle said, Fenstermacher, quit climbing the rope, Wally quit climbing the rope. But when Miss Grunkle said, Fenstermacher, quit climbing the rope, Wally was at the top of the rope. So there he was, 4 stories above the ground. And Miss Grunkle said, well, she said one of those stupid things that adults say to children. She said, Fenstermacher, you're in a lot of trouble. You come down right now and get your punishment. Now, Wally was up. The punishment was down. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't come down. And Wally didn't say anything, but I know what he was thinking. He was thinking, I'm not coming down. And you're sure not coming up. And Miss Grunkle said, Fenstermacher, if you don't come down right now, I'm going to call Mr. Woodcraft. And again, Wally didn't say anything, but I know what he was thinking. Go ahead, call Mr. Woodcraft. He's not coming up here either. And before long, Mr. Woodcraft came in the gym, and he was all, Fenstermacher, you're really getting on my last nerve. You come down right now. Wally didn't say anything. Now, the ceiling of our gymnasium was held up by big metal trusses. I'm talking like maybe 4-foot tall metal trusses. And there was one of those metal trusses every 24 inches, all the way down the entire length of the ceiling of the gym. And the rope was tied to one of those trusses way at this end of the gym. And when Mr. Woodcraft said, Fenstermacher, you come down right now, Wally didn't say anything. He just let go of the rope with one hand, grabbed hold of that metal truss. Let go of the rope with the other hand, grabbed hold of that metal truss, did a pull-up, and Wally was in the ceiling. And Mr. Woodcraft said, Fenstermacher, you better think about what you're doing. And Wally thought about it. And he reached down and he grabbed the rope. And Mr. Woodcraft said, Fenstermacher, if you don't come down right now, we're going to call the principal. And so the principal came down. And there was Ms. Grunkle and Mr. Woodcraft and the principal, and they were all over there, adult, trying to figure out what to do. And they figured out that Wally needed rescued. And they thought, who in our community is responsible for rescuing people? And pretty soon, the $50 volunteer fire department came running in the gym. And one of those firemen had a big extension ladder. And he put that extension ladder up underneath Wally, and he started to climb. and he got about halfway up that ladder. And Wally let himself down so he was hanging from the ceiling, reached out, grabbed the next one of those metal trusses, and then Wally just monkey barred clear down to the other end of the gym. And when Wally got to that end of the gym, the fireman climbed down his ladder, took his ladder, went to that end of the gym, put it up underneath Wally, started to climb, got about halfway up. Wally let himself down, monkey barred back down to that end of the gym. So Wally was monkey barring back and forth. The fireman was running back and forth. Miss Grunkle was driving back and forth. Fenstermacher, you come down right now. Pretty soon the fire department figured out they weren't going to get Wally. They figured out that Wally didn't need rescued. People who need rescued because they don't have any other avenue of escape. Wally had plenty of avenues of escape. Wally didn't need rescued. Wally needed trapped. And that is not the fire department's purview. So the adults thought, who in our community is responsible for trapping things? And pretty soon the humane officer, the dog catcher, came running in the gym. And he had that big net on that long stick like you see in a cartoon, but it wasn't nearly long enough to catch Wally. So he went out to his truck, and he came back in a couple of minutes, and he had a long, thin, rectangular box. And he put it on the floor, and he flipped some latches, and he opened it up. And there was a rifle. But it was not an ordinary rifle. It was a tranquilizer gun. And he started to tell us what a tranquilizer gun was. But we didn't need anyone to tell us what a tranquilizer gun was, because we had grown up watching a television show called Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And every week on that show, there's this guy named Jim, and he'd be like on the skids of a helicopter, 9 feet above the Australian outback with a tranquilizer gun chasing a dingo. Or he'd be in the African savannah in the back of a pickup truck driving, chasing a white rhinoceros with a tranquilizer gun. And this other guy, Marlon Perkins, safe in a studio back in New York City, would be saying, now Jim is going to shoot the white rhinoceros with a tranquilizer dart. And he's put just enough tranquilizer in the dart to subdue the white rhinoceros, but not kill the white rhinoceros. Be careful, Jim. And the humane officer was saying to us, I'm putting just enough tranquilizer in this dart to subdue Wally, but not kill Wally. Wally was hanging 4 stories above the ground. It didn't matter how much tranquilizer you hit him with. He was going to be like that. So the fire department went out and they got their big net. So Wally was monkey barring back and forth. The firemen were chasing back and forth. Miss Grunkle was driving back and forth. Fenstermacher, you come down right now. And the humane officer was tracking Wally, and he fired and he missed. And I don't mean by a little. I mean, we were in a rural West Virginia hunting community. He had to quit his job, change his name, and move to Ohio. And we watched that dart fly up. It hit one of those metal beams, ricocheted, came back down, and hit Ms. Grunkle right in the shoulder. And she went over like a white rhinoceros. Just bam! She was out cold. If he had hit Wally with that much tranquilizer, Wally would be more than dead. But when she went over, she took her scooter with her. And she still had her hand locked on the throttle, so she was spinning around on the floor. We were all trying to get out of the way. And then the adults did what maybe they should have done in the first place. They called Wally's parents. And in a few minutes, Wally's mom came running in the gym. And she did just what you would do if you thought your child was hurt in the gym. She was looking on the floor. Where's my child? What's wrong with my child? And then she looked up and she saw Wally hanging from the ceiling. And she said, Wally, what are you doing? And he said, I'm hanging from the ceiling, Mom. And she said, Wally, why don't you come down? And he said, I'm not coming down, Mom. He said, I'm not coming down until Mr. Woodcraft formally recognizes Wallace and Futuna as a country. And Mr. Woodcraft was like, I'm not going to recognize Wallace and Futuna as a country. And Mrs. Fenstermacher, Wally's mom, she didn't react in a way that the other adults anticipated or appreciated. She'd been in the Peace Corps. She was kind of a hippie. She liked a good protest. She said, "You go, son! Fight for what you believe in!" So Wally just did a pull-up. He stayed up in the ceiling. He lived up there like a bird in a box store. We went back to class. He was up there for days. Every now and again, our gymnasium, well, not every now and again, our gymnasium and our cafeteria were always the same room. But every now and again, what would happen in that same room is that you'd be walking with your lunch tray and Wally would swing down from the ceiling, steal your fried chicken, and go back up. If he ever needed anything, he'd drop us a note, and we'd sneak into the gym after school. He'd lower the rope. We had a big basket tied on it. Put in whatever supplies he needed. He'd pull it back up. Finally, it was the night of the big gala. We were all in the gym. Our adults were there. We'd eaten our food. Kids were standing up, reciting their countries, pointing to their flags, reading their reports. And finally, the little girl got up to do the last several letters of the alphabet. And she said, "Vietnam," pointing to the flag for Vietnam. She said, "Vietnam, Venezuela, Virgin Islands, Wake Islands." And after she said Wake Islands, and pointed to the flag for the Wake Islands, but before she could say West Germany, and point to the flag for West Germany, Wallace Fortuna Fenstermacher, unfurled himself from the ceiling. He was hanging by his knees between the flags of the Wake Islands and West Germany. And he wasn't wearing nothing. Well, I mean, he had his underwear on. But he had taken the paint that he had asked me to send up to him, and he had painted himself so that he looked just like the flag for the country of Wallace and Fortuna. It has a red background with a white cross patee in the middle, the French tricolors up in the corner. He was hanging there, painted like the flag for Wallace and Fortuna, hanging between the flags of the Wake Islands and West Germany, his blonde hair dangling like the fringes on a flag. The whole place went quiet. Wally's parents stood up, and I know what they were thinking. They were thinking, our child is the smartest, brightest, most creative child in the whole school system. And they were right. And then Mr. Woodcraft stood up, and he didn't say anything for a long minute. He just stared at Wally, painted like the flag for Wallace and Fortuna, hanging between the flags of the Wake Islands and West Germany. And finally, after a long minute, Mr. Woodcraft rapped his knuckle on the table like he was hitting a gavel on a podium. And he said, "Well, I guess I formally recognize Wallace and Fortuna as a country." And I think what we can learn from this is that even a seemingly insignificant person perpetrating a seemingly mindless act while clinging to nothing more than the moral high ground can, in fact, change the hearts of the stubborn and the minds of the ignorant.
Please join us for the remainder of the Midland Storytelling Festival for 2021. You can go to our Facebook page or our website at www.midlandstorytellingfestival.org to see the full festival schedule. Then keep it locked right here on our YouTube channel. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Tell everybody. And thank you for watching.